Welcome to Inspired Caregiver with me, Michelle Magner. This is the podcast where people who are helping out their older family members come for information, tips, and inspiration on how to make their journey easier. Enjoy this episode of Inspired Caregiver.
I can do that.
Well, welcome to Conversations with Caregivers. Good evening. This is Jason, not Jody.
Yeah, it says Jody Krukowski on the screen, but my name's Jason Nicholson. I'm just using my wife's technology tonight.
It's brilliant. Yeah. So tell me about what you do.
Okay. I am a speech language pathologist. I got my license back in 1999, finished graduate school there. And for the last, 22 years now, 21 if my math's 22 if my math's correct. I've worked in a variety of different arenas. Started out working in the schools, worked with kiddos for about 3 years. After that, I made a jump to working in skilled nursing facilities and long-term care facilities, driving all over Northeast Kansas, basically Topeka to Atchison. So kind of up north there, kind of towards you all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made the jump from skilled nursing facilities and long-term care to hospital-based speech therapy services. So still kept my foot in the long-term care arena throughout that whole time. So working with adults has kind of I found my niche there. So that's where I'm most comfortable. So I've been doing this for, like I said, about 22, and
Wow.
19 of them have been working with adults in various capacities. So,
is there a difference between a speech therapist and a speech pathologist?
Really only in title. Speech pathology as a discipline started without any sort of formal education requirements back, 30, 40, 50 years ago, whatever it was. So everybody was just called speech therapists. It then grew and developed into a program that you have to have your master's degree completed from an accredited university.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to pass our national examination, which is kind of like the bar exam for attorneys.
Okay.
And that's from the American Speech Language Hearing Association. So from there, it developed into a profession that works with more than just speaking disorders. We work with obviously speaking disorders, but also disorders of language, cognitive disorders from whatever source. We do swallowing therapy. I do a lot of that in the hospitals. So it evolved from just speaking therapy to more a multidisciplinary type thing.
Yeah.
Anything that's brain or throat based, we're going to work with. And the pathology part of it kind of comes into play. We try and break the disorder down into its most basic components to try and treat root causes of it. Speech is just kind of the byproduct of all of that. So, but anybody right now, we'll answer to speech therapist or speech pathologist. It doesn't matter. So
okay. Well, and I think you've already started to unpack a lot of what I think people have questions or misunderstandings about. Like if maybe a doctor gives a referral for a speech therapist, if after someone has had a stroke, what would be some of the things that referral would help the patient with?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is in the hospital type setting, and I believe a lot of times in the skilled nursing facility setting too, or long-term care, we'll do a swallow evaluation to make sure that whatever the person is eating or drinking is not part of that liquid or food is not being deposited down a person's windpipe and then into their lungs. That's called swallowing disorders are called dysphagia. And people ask us, well, it's a swallowing thing. Why are speech therapists? Why am I seeing a speech therapist?
Right.
Well, this thing here, your throat, I mean, yes, we learn about it for like voice production and communication, but your primary biological function of this is to coordinate breathing and swallowing. So we learn about this mechanism just by default. Your speech mechanism down here, your voice box in your throat that we use to speak with, is the very same musculature that we use to swallow and to keep ourselves safe. So my primary job as a speech pathologist right now is for somebody that's had a stroke, they come in with stroke symptoms. I want to make sure that they can swallow safely.
Right.
We want to keep a person eating and drinking so they can, fuel whatever type of recovery that they may have to go through. From there, we can branch out and look at articulation. We can look at voice, any changes from your normal voice quality.
Mhm.
The language component of your brain, which means everything that you're hearing come in through your ears right now, there's a part of your brain that has to actually decode its message and its meaning.
Mhm.
Um, that there's a specific center called your Wernicke's area back here in your left back, it's behind your temple a little bit. That's the main area that's responsible for decoding messages that you're hearing. The area in front of it, like right behind your temple, is called Broca's area, and that's the area that's responsible for taking the ideas that you have in your head and putting words and ideas to them so you can then actually physically produce the words and to communicate.
Okay.
So it's multi, there's a lot of different parts of the body and the brain that are involved in it. So we do swallowing first, speech, articulation, clarity, which includes voice, language development and language comprehension. And that can be either written or verbal. And then we also throw the huge component of cognition in there. Anything that's brain-based that can affect your communication skills, such as problem solving or reasoning, your personal insight, attention to task, all those things fall under the umbrella of cognition, and that's what we treat as well. So,
So it wouldn't just be stroke potentially. There would be other circumstances when speech therapy would be beneficial.
anytime that there's a change in those five, I think it was five areas that I just mentioned, it doesn't matter where it's caused from, in your loved one's life, if you see a change, an abrupt change in functioning in those areas, number one, they need, if it's an urgent thing, like if it's a changing on a dime or overnight, they need to seek medical help.
Mhm.
But once they identify why it changed, whether it be stroke, whether it be a brain aneurysm, whether it be some sort of neurological disorder like Parkinson's,
Mhm.
or just straight dementia or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. If your functional status changes, that's an appropriate time to discuss a referral to a speech therapist with your physician. Um, Obviously, once you're sure that they're safe.
Sure. And I think it can be really hard when people are taking care of someone at home because you're so ingrained in what the circumstances are
Right.
that there can
Yeah,
be sudden onset, but then there can also be this slow decline that's
exactly.
really subtle and you don't even realize it's happening, but there would still be benefit
Yes, absolutely.
of the referral.
Absolutely. And that's where the long-term care side of things come into play. And that's a really good point, Michelle. Um, in that realm, most of my patients that I talk to, I try and discuss what's going on with family members as well.
Mhm.
And one of the most important pieces of advice I can give them is to make sure that you become familiar with where you can receive therapy services,
Yeah.
physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech pathology, because no matter where you are or your loved one is in life, those three people are going to keep your loved one functioning as best as possible.
Mhm.
Okay, we directly address functional activities that you do. Sometimes those things that you're having trouble with can't be fixed overnight. We tend to want to go to the pharmacy and get a pill, get
Right.
a course of antibiotics to, fix our cold or the flu or whatever. But therapy can be a lifelong thing.
Mhm.
For people with Parkinson's, for example, physical exercise and just keeping moving is very important. on
Mhm.
multiple different levels, the brain level and functional muscle level. Um, well, there's no better person to keep you functioning safely with different exercise programs than your physical therapist.
Right.
And that doesn't have to be the same program all the time. It's there. A person's physical capabilities at 80 may be completely different than at 90.
Mhm.
You know, um, I think back to the example of Justice Bader Ginsburg when she was going through her cancer and she was doing physical therapy. I mean, she was working out with some guy doing boxing and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Was she in her 90s or something?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
You have to do that. If you don't try these things, of course you're going to lose those skills. you
Right.
know uh, and it just because a person's growing older, that doesn't eliminate you from keeping a sound mind and body. You've
And
retired, but you're
yeah.
not dead.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, I think that's a misconception as well, that people just assume that we
Yeah.
will all have dementia or have a really
Right.
lengthy decline. And
Hmm.
if we put a little effort in
Yeah.
over time, some consistent effort,
Yeah.
we can have big
And
benefits.
that's the main thing. I mean, if you think back to, say for you and I, Michelle, when we were in college together, we went in, whatever class it was, we were terrible in it that very first day.
Right.
Our first day as a freshman, we didn't know what we were going to do in this class of, calculus or whatever it was, or writing
Yeah,
or
you're
literature by
very
women.
flattering. I've never taken calculus.
But
Yes.
the thing is that the class,
Yes.
it's a program. It's a program of daily practice.
Right.
And through that practice, you got better. Next thing you know, it's the end of the semester and we've learned something. And I'm like,
Right.
I didn't know I could do that. Well, that process of learning doesn't stop even though you're 90. You know,
Right.
it just takes a different shape, a different form. That's all.
Something I thought was really interesting when I was doing my practicum for my master's certificate in gerontology was
Hmm.
it was at a medically supervised exercise studio.
Hmm.
So people had literally had a medical episode of some sort, a heart attack or something, and the doctor
Right.
wrote them a prescription for exercise and they would come to this facility. And
Hmm.
what was so interesting to me was most of the people were in street clothes. They were just in jeans and
Hmm.
maybe some, running tennis shoes or something, and they would sit and have a cup of coffee, and then they would
Yeah.
go hop on a treadmill for a bit, or do their weights, and then come back and have coffee. So really, they also had that social benefit
Yeah.
of the therapy
Yeah.
and exercise too.
Yeah. The physical side of things doesn't have to be strenuous.
Right.
Just get off the couch, get away from the
Right.
television, and just move.
Yeah.
I mean, they even have in the hospital, if somebody is so physically disabled, they can't move on their own. We're still in there. They call it passive range of motion exercises, where we'll literally just pick up a person's foot and move their leg in specific ranges of motion that the body can do to
Mhm.
keep muscles and ligaments and everything moving. Because otherwise, if you're not, everything's just going to get real tight and just kind of clamp up.
Right.
And the same concept, Michelle, what you were just saying about the socialization thing, the same concept applies to your brain processes, the cognitive side of things, or the language abilities. Brain teasers,
Mhm.
learning something new,
Mhm.
the mental gymnastics side of things is what I do every day. And I rarely go in and say, okay, here's a packet of brain teaser stuff. Let's do them together. And I sit and watch them do it. No, I give it to them
Mhm.
and I let them do it and I watch them fail. And I'm like, okay, you failed. What are you going to do? Oh, enough of that. No, you're not putting it away. We're going to do it again
Right.
because I'm going to teach you that I don't care how long you take to do it. As long as you're trying to stretch your mind for 15 or 30 minutes at a time, that's the therapy side of things.
Right.
Engaging your brain in something that's challenging is a mental gymnastic. It's a mental activity that's good for you, just like getting out of your chair and walking around the block. You know,
That's where we can take advantage of that neuroplasticity and
exactly.
start creating those new
Hmm.
new waves.
Everybody, if you're listening to this, Google that term, neuroplasticity. The phrase "you can't teach an old dog new tricks." I hate it.
Wrong.
It's absolutely wrong. You
Yeah.
can't teach a stubborn dog new tricks,
I love that.
but you can actually learn new things. I don't care how old you are.
Yeah.
The difference is that you can't learn it in the same way or at the same speed as you did when you were in college.
Hmm.
And if you could, then you probably would be one of the richest persons in the world because you're the only one in the world that could do that.
Right. Well,
You
and
know,
you know what's so funny is I'm reading a book called Successful Aging, and the author references what dingbats college students are. That they're constantly forgetting stuff, they're forgetting assignments and deadlines and where
yeah,
everybody's and all of that, but it seems okay, like they don't have the hangups with it
yeah,
that we have the older that we get.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's absolutely this strive for perfection and getting things fixed, getting them wrapped up nice and neat in this little package so you can, okay, put it away and go on to the next thing.
Mhm.
A person's mindset really has to get away from that, I think, as we grow older. You know, the thing that you have to remember is that what's changing about your life is that there are going to be things that happen to you that you don't plan for.
Mhm.
But we work so hard to get to that point. When we're working, we retire and then we go, whoo, now I can do nothing. Well,
Right.
that's not the right thing to do,
Yeah.
because if you do that, you're going to be stuck in a chair watching TV all day. And if that's your idea of fun, then okay,
Yeah.
but it's not what we're talking about here.
Right. It's not gonna give you the quality of life that you're seeking in the long run,
Yeah,
or the
yeah,
longevity, really.
yeah.
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
for in our family, my mother-in-law has frontotemporal dementia, and
Okay.
she is actually nonverbal at this point, so she struggles with communication.
Right.
But before she got to this point, when she was still living at home, the sign that I saw that indicated she needed some speech therapy was she kept biting her tongue while she was eating. So she would take a bite and be chewing and then like wince
Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
bite her tongue. And once we moved her into an assisted living facility, they recognized that fairly quickly and were able to get some speech
Right.
involved. And it
Mm.
really helped. And the
Yeah.
concern was with the family, well, she has dementia. How's she going to remember?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, yeah. A lot of times, the person doesn't have to. Once you get an educated eye in there, and
Mhm.
like a speech therapist or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, and they know that environment where she is, maybe they can make changes to the environment to match what she's doing.
Oh, that's so good, right?
It's more than just going in and teaching the person something new, or pointing out what they're doing wrong and saying you need to do it like this,
Yeah.
because people with dementia, depending on how severe it is, they may remember, they may not. They may have difficulty with new learning skills, and if that's the case, then you have no choice but to modify the environment. And that's where the burden on the caregivers really comes into play, is that mom and dad may move in with you, and you have to completely remodel your bedroom, because just to keep them safe. you
Right.
know Give them put the grab bars all over the room or in the bathroom, or get rid of the rugs, even though
Immediately get rid of the rugs.
rugs are terrible.
Immediately. Yeah.
um you People want to fix people that have advanced dementia,
Mhm.
and there's no fixing it.
Right.
It's dealing with it. you know that's why they call it a chronic illness.
Mm.
It's not a death sentence by any means. It's just recognizing that mom or dad's life is going down a different path than what everybody anticipated or planned.
Right.
Your plans for your 50s, 60s, and 70s probably are not going to look like real life once you get there. And you have to have that flexibility to go, okay, here's where I am right now. How can I deal with this, and how can I manage it? You
Right.
know, um, One of the things that I do a lot of right now, I work with a lot of patients that have head and neck cancer. that have swallowing difficulties, or they lose the ability to swallow because of surgeries or where the tumor is or radiation therapy.
Mm,
And these people, it's treatable. The cancer is treatable. You can have a very long life with this type of deal, but what changes is how they eat and drink or how they speak. And once they get on the train of, okay, this is different than what I'm used to, but I can deal with this, then life tends to open up for all these people. You
mm,
know, it's all a matter of mindset and perspective and being open to learning something new, and then being okay with, oh, that didn't go right either. Let's try something different.
right.
You have to let yourself fail in that context. It's not a problem.
Keep shifting.
Yes,
Shifting.
good term. Keep shifting.
So one
Set
of
it.
the environmental the two things that immediately come to my mind, like with the eating, uh,
Mhm.
portion would be potentially different utensils or the textures of the food.
Exactly. Yeah, and those are modifications based on whatever the diagnosis might be. Let's use your example.
Mhm.
The utensils. Some people with Parkinson's have the tremors,
Right.
like that.
Yep.
Sometimes, if you take a spoon that has been built up to where the diameter is bigger and has more weight to it,
Mhm.
it helps to steady the tremor, so they can actually feed themselves and put it in their mouth instead of
Mhm.
all over their face.
Right.
As a speech pathologist, what I deal with to help keep people safe when they can't do it on their own is the modified textures. And that's
Mhm.
where the pureed foods and the softer foods or the thickened liquids come into play. Um, a lot of people have had bad experiences with those just because they go in and they see a relative or a friend or something and they see, this person looking like they're eating baby food. Well,
Yeah.
yes, it's not visually appealing. But there's research that says in certain cases, certain situations, a pureed diet like that is safer. It helps the bolus be more cohesive and stay together as it goes through the throat and down into the stomach. You know, some people don't pay any attention to it. They're just like, dinner. And they go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
Some people have some texture issues with it. Well, my question is that who doesn't have some texture issues with some food?
Right.
I mean, you put liver in front of me in its normal state, and I'm still not going to eat it.
Yeah, right.
I don't like that texture. So
Right.
once you visit with a speech pathologist and they make their recommendations following the evaluation in terms of what diet consistencies would be good for the person, then you can play around with that to find out, okay, what works for this person, what doesn't work for this person. You know, um, you can still have a meal, sit down and have Thanksgiving dinner with somebody with pureed foods and thickened liquids. It
Mhm.
just yours looks different than the rest of the family. And if
Right.
if you can come to terms with that, then it can be just as pleasurable of an event as regular Thanksgiving,
Right.
you
Because
know.
it's also about the people and the connections.
That's exactly right.
Um,
It's exactly right. And that's part of what I try and educate patients and family about is
right.
that your life is changing, but this doesn't define who you are. You
Right.
know, do you still value the relationships that you have? And if you do, cultivate that.
Mhm.
Your life is not defined whether or not your steak is cut up in small pieces or it's whole.
Right.
It's just not. And if it is, then you'll be doing some soul searching. That's
Right.
fine too.
Well, and I mean, to that point, I think that's where you're starting to think about what's your legacy? What's your legacy for your family?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be how you ate your steak.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
They're not going to remember that. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. You know, my dad told me that one, I still remember it. He's like, man, when they take my car keys away from me, he's like, put me in the ground. I'm done. I'm like, Dad, does driving a car really define your life that much?
Right.
And he said, well, it's important to me. I'm like, that wasn't the question, Dad. Does
Right.
driving a car define who you are? And he
Mm,
said, well, no. I said, well, what does define you? And the first thing he said was that he's a preacher, so he's like, well,
Mhm.
my relationship with God. And I'm like, okay, what does that got to do with driving the car?
Right.
You know, he
Can't
still
take
didn't want
that
to hear
away.
it. So, you know, it's just it's a matter of perspective and changing your paradigm as to how your life is going.
Right.
And that's not just for the patient, but that's also for the caregivers.
Right.
Maybe you didn't plan on taking care of your mother-in-law at one point, Michelle, but once you went and you embraced that role, there are times where I'm sure you look at that and go, wow, I'm glad I had that opportunity. I learned so much about this lady that I had no idea. You know, there's always good that comes with it, along with the bad. But it's a positive memory when you look back at it as a whole, probably.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it really is on certain days it is embracing the suck. Like
Yeah,
some days you
yeah,
just have to embrace it.
yeah.
And there are
Embrace.
other
That's
days
good.
where
I
you're
like
just
that.
finding those moments of joy and creating those moments of joy.
Yeah,
Um
yeah. The I haven't been down that specific road yet with taking care of my parents or any of my in-laws yet, but the thing that comes to mind is that I when I met my current wife about 6 years ago or so, I had a dog that had his name was Bean, and he was a black lab, and he was the sweetest guy you'd ever met in your life.
mhm.
But he was nearing the end of his life, and he lost function in the back half of him. He couldn't walk very well at times, and he was incontinent. And it's terrible. So I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, but I get a call. I'm at the grocery store and I get a call from Jody because she's pregnant
Uh-huh.
and she's sick every day anyway. She with nausea because of her pregnancy,
Yeah.
but Bean had lost himself all over the floor
Oh.
and was slipping and sliding, and it was just a
Oh,
mess in the house. And she called me, and she's like, "Come get your dog!" Da, 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 and I'm like, "What's going on?" So I get home, and it's just a mess everywhere. The
it's everywhere.
smells, the sights everywhere. It was terrible in the moment, but talking about it now, every time Jody and I talk about it, we just can't help but laugh.
Right.
And embracing the suck, Michelle, is an absolutely perfect term for this because looking back at it then, I didn't want to be there. She didn't want to be there. And I know the dog didn't want this to happen,
Yeah.
but it created a memory and an experience that I appreciate in a lot of ways.
Right.
Um, I wouldn't want anybody else to have taken care of him in that time period. I just wouldn't. I'm glad it was me.
I
So
mean, it does bring up an important topic of quality of life and what are your deal breakers? And I think in our
yeah,
country, we continue to treat the human body exhaustively until
yeah,
everyone has reached a just critical
yeah,
maximum peak. So, for
yeah,
example, I had someone come to my rehab facility that had a feeding tube and 2 ostomy bags and had just barely gotten off of life support, and the family just insisted on continuing the treatments.
right.
And really, that's what the doctors are trained to do. Like,
Sure.
there needs to be no mistake about how the doctors are trained in our country is to keep us alive, really, at all costs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah, that's a physician's job
Mhm.
if that's what the goals of care are.
Right.
And one of the hardest things that I've come across is sitting down and having to tell a family like, you know, mom really shouldn't be eating now, and I don't foresee her being able to eat again.
Mm,
And having to go down the road of having a tube placed into her stomach to keep her eat alive.
right.
Um, and the way that I try and approach it is to say, I'm not telling you you need to put a feeding tube in mom or dad. What I'm telling you is that when mom or dad eats, they are consistently putting particles of food or liquids into their lungs,
Right.
and it's going to make them sick. whether it be now or later, and just say, basically just put the seed out there that says, you guys need to talk about what's important. You know, I never push to put a feeding tube in somebody,
Mhm.
um, unless they're asking for treatment options. You
Right.
know, somebody that there are times where it's appropriate. Say the person that's had the stroke that you had mentioned earlier. Um, when you have a stroke, I don't care who the doctor is or what professionals is working with you. Nobody can tell what type of improvement a person's going to have or not have. You know, they're in an acute situation. Very few times do you know, are you able to predict the future?
Mhm.
And in certain situations, feeding tubes are absolutely appropriate. If it was me that I had a stroke and I didn't have the ability to swallow right now, absolutely, yes, give me a
Right.
feeding tube,
Right.
because I want the opportunity to work with therapy to regain my swallow.
Right.
That's a good time to, because I get a lot of people off of feeding tubes. You
Mhm.
know, I mean, I'm able to do that with the things that I do in therapy.
Right.
But say mom and dad are 95, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, and they have Parkinson's and they have advanced dementia because that's associated with
Mhm.
it. They've had pneumonia half a dozen times. You know, 10 years ago, a speech therapist or somebody talked them into doing a feeding tube, and let's do rehab and get
Mhm.
them better and stuff. And it's just been a fight the whole time.
Right.
There is an appropriate time to say, no, I don't think that we want to do that. I don't think dad would want that. You
Right.
know, your living wills are very important pieces of uh,
Yeah, documents.
it's
Oh my gosh. Living wills and power of attorney. Everybody should have that right now. However
absolutely.
old you are, these are not documents for quote old people. This is
Oh,
for everybody.
nope. Jody and I, I just turned 50 last year. Michelle, you didn't hear that.
I love it. That's awesome. I'm excited about being 50. I turn 49 next month.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah.
When Jody and I met and got married, Jody's older and I'm older too. And our son Riker, he's our first child for both of us.
Mhm.
But as soon as she got pregnant, we got into an attorney and we had our living wills drawn up.
Oh
We
yeah.
had a trust made, all of that stuff. Just because we didn't, number one, we wanted to state what we wanted done. We didn't want anybody guessing.
Right.
We didn't want to put that burden on Riker, you
Right.
know? So I'm like, is it kind of a morbid conversation? Well, yeah, but it's a worthwhile conversation.
Right.
You know,
Have,
things that are worthwhile talking about aren't easy.
that's important. It's important. Have you read Being Mortal yet?
No, I have not. Haven't even
Oh
heard
my
of it.
gosh.
Tell me
It's
about it.
Being Mortal, a tool. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Gowand. He's a physician and his father
Uh-huh.
was a physician. And he just talks extensively about how medical professionals are trained in our country.
Mhm.
And you have to be your own advocate and make decisions on the quality of life you want, and then pursue
Yep.
the treatments that will help you
Mhm.
meet those qualities of life.
Right.
So if you're
Mhm.
in your 80s and or whatever age, forget the age, like if you have a list of things that are your deal breakers, you have to be the ones to stand up and tell the doctors, I don't want to pursue treatment.
Right. Yeah.
Because
And there's nothing wrong with doing that.
right.
Saying to your doctor, no, I don't want to do that, doc.
Yeah.
Well, if they're giving you a guilt trip about it, then you need to go to another doctor, quite
Right.
honestly. Because your compassionate doctors, the ones I come across, the really good doctors that I work with, they're the ones that they shut their mouth and they listen to the patient and the family. You know, they're adept at steering conversations around identifying what the goals of care are.
Mhm.
You know, if your goals of care are to get back to normal functioning, then do everything you can.
Right.
If your goal is to just, I want to make it through January 10th because my granddaughter is getting married that day, and that's all you're concerned about, why are you worried about any long-term effects of medication?
Right.
You
So
know,
yeah, that's so
we've
good.
we've had multiple people that come to our rehab unit that that may have cancer or end stage this or that. And they're like, my whole goal is that I want to walk down the aisle to my granddaughter's wedding.
Mhm.
And I can die after that. I don't care. I just want to go to her wedding.
Yeah.
So that's the goal of plan of care, is get this person functional enough to be able to walk 50 feet down the aisle with his granddaughter.
Yes.
Great goal.
I love that.
You
Super
know?
motivating.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of these topics, Michelle, and this is for people that are listening, this is what I want. If you take nothing from this discussion at all, is that number one, you do have to advocate for yourself,
Mhm.
but don't be afraid to look at options. Your family doctor that you've had for the last 50 years, good guy. He's not the only doctor in town. If you
Right.
have any questions, get a second opinion. You
Mhm.
know, that, and be flexible to change your idea of how the rest of your life should go. Should is just a word. When people use that, that's just code for giving yourself a guilt trip.
Wow, yeah,
There's
that's powerful.
there's no way there's no way you should live your life, Michelle. You
Right.
know, there's the way you should live your life is by what you want to do. If I
Mhm.
can be contradictory,
Yeah. No,
you know.
I'm picking up what you're laying down. Yeah.
So
No,
there's no guilt associated with it. When you're in your last month on this earth, and you're sitting in a hospital bed and you're visiting with all your friends and loved ones that are still there, you're not going to have any guilt for what you should have done. Just make a decision about what you want to do and move forward.
yeah, that's so
And if somebody wants to make judgment on that, then they'll be having that same conversation with themselves at some point too, when it's their
yeah.
time. You know,
Well, and you'll be gone, so you don't have to worry about them thinking about it.
it's true.
So what would you say to family caregivers, just to close this out? What would you share with them? 'Cause you had mentioned
Hmm.
this is just a huge area that
Hmm.
needs support.
Educate yourself.
Mm,
Um, Number one, talk to your parents or whoever it is that you're caregiving for. It could be a sibling or a brother or uncle or whatever.
mhm.
Educate yourself in terms of what their wants and needs are. The advanced directives, the living wills, all that's good stuff to know. Assume that your loved one is not going to be able to tell you in an acute illness what it is that they want. If they have a stroke where they completely lose their ability to speak, how are you going to know if they want a feeding tube or not? Or
Right.
how do you know how hard they want to fight? You know, so ask those questions. It's okay. And if it's a tear-filled conversation, okay, then you've got a tear-stained
Yeah.
advanced directive in front of you. No problem. You still have it identified. And then as illnesses come along, just embrace the suck.
Mhm.
Like you said, I love that phrase.
Mhm.
Jot down the things that you want to remember, because the bad things about your day, those can completely cloud your day, and they're going to be recurring themes every day.
Wow.
Dad can't swallow. Dad can't do this. Dad can't do that. Dad can't do this. You got to look at the other side of the spectrum and find out what dad or mom can do
Mhm.
and embrace that.
Yeah.
If you don't identify the good parts, then you're not going to acknowledge them. Um, and then just roll with it. Do your best and save judgment for later. Let God do that.
There you go.
You know,
I
um,
love that. Well, it's I think the hardest job in the world
yeah.
is taking care of a family member.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
I agree. I agree. I
so
haven't done it yet, but like I say, I've done this. I've I work with people that are put in that situation every day, not by choice.
right,
It'll happen.
right.
It's Nobody wants that situation, but you're here. How are you going to react to it? You know,
Right,
um, your plans, throw them out the window.
right,
Embrace the conflict that faces you. You
right.
know, Gotta sound like my dad, the preacher.
There you go. There's part of his legacy.
But
Thank you. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, not a problem. If it helps, if you want to make uh, my email, Facebook, whatever available,
Yeah.
if you want to send me a message or whatever with a question or whatever, I'm happy to answer them. If anything, I can help guide you in the right direction with where you should go with your question. Like specific medical professionals or just back to Michelle's front porch. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that's half the battle is just knowing what to ask. So
Exactly. Or
that's a
who
very
to ask.
or who to
Yeah.
ask. That's a very generous offer. Thank you.
Yeah. So, if it just takes me saying, hey, go to the hospital and call the outpatient therapy department and ask for the speech therapist.
Mhm.
You know,
Could be a small
sometimes that's all you need is just some place to start.
yeah. That's really
So
good. Well, thank you.
you're welcome. Appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.